When my wife Carol told me I wouldn't be welcome at her parents' Christmas dinner because I didn't fit their social circle, I smiled, nodded, and started planning. By New Year's Eve, I had exposed every penny of the $195,000 I'd given her over 4 years in front of 200 of Seattle's most prominent families. You won't believe what I discovered along the way. My name is Victor Martinez. I'm 58 years old. And this is how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones planning to destroy you. It started on a Tuesday evening in our Bellevue home. I was reviewing construction contracts at the kitchen table when Carol walked in, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors I'd paid to install last year. She poured herself a glass of the expensive wine she'd developed a taste for since marrying me and sat across from me with that look she got when she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in fake concern. "Victor, honey, we need to talk about Christmas." I looked up from my paperwork. After 22 years in the Navy and another 15 building my construction business from nothing, I'd learned to recognize when someone was maneuvering for position. Carol's voice had that careful tone she used when she wanted something. "What about Christmas?" I asked. She took a sip of wine and avoided my eyes. "Well, my parents have invited some very important people this year. The Hendersons from the Yacht Club, Judge Morrison and his wife, the Caldwells from Father's Bank. It's going to be quite formal. I waited in the Navy. We called this softening the target. And frankly, Victor, they're concerned about how you might fit in with their guests." There it was, 4 years of marriage, and we'd finally arrived at the truth. I set down my pen carefully and looked at my wife of 45. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her outfit probably worth more than most people made in a month. All of it paid for with money I'd earned with my hands while she played house. "What exactly are they concerned about, Carol?" She shifted in her chair. "You know how my family is? They're very traditional, very refined. These people expect a certain level of sophistication, and I don't have that level of sophistication. It's not that you're not sophisticated, it's just different. You tell stories about construction sites and military deployments. You eat with your hands sometimes. You laugh too loudly." I nodded slowly. "I see. And what do you suggest?" Relief flooded her face. She'd expected a fight, and I was being reasonable. "Maybe you could visit Helen for Christmas? Your sister always enjoys seeing you, and this way there won't be any awkwardness." Awkwardness. That's what I was to my wife's family, an embarrassment to be managed. "Of course," I said. I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Carol beamed and reached across to squeeze my hand. "I knew you'd understand. You're so good about these things, Victor. It's one of the things I love about you." One of the things she loved about me was how easily I could be pushed aside when convenient, noted. That night after Carol went to bed, I sat in my home office looking through our financial records. I'd been supporting her lifestyle since we got married, but I'd never actually added up the total. The numbers were staggering. $35,000 for the kitchen renovation because the old one wasn't suitable for entertaining. $18,000 for her car because she needed something that reflected our success. $12,000 for the furniture in the living room. $5,000 for the wine cellar. Monthly allowances that started at $2,000 and gradually crept up to $3,000. 4 years of Christmas gifts to her family that averaged $4,000 per year. I pulled out my calculator and started adding kitchen, car, furniture, wine cellar. The monthly allowances alone came to $120,000 over $48 months. The gifts totaled $16,000. When I added everything up, the total came to $185,000. Nearly $200,000 I'd given to a woman who was now telling me I wasn't good enough to attend a dinner party. I opened my laptop and started doing research. Carol's father, Harvey Sterling, had been an investment banker before retiring to manage the family foundation. Her mother, Patricia, served on the boards of several Seattle charities and spent her time organizing fundraisers for causes that photographed well. The Sterling Foundation, I'd heard about it for years, how important it was, how prestigious. Their annual Christmas gala was apparently the social event of the season for Seattle's old money families. This year, it was scheduled for December 28th at the Four Seasons, with proceeds going to the Children's Hospital. I scrolled through photos from previous years on their website. Carol appeared in several, always perfectly dressed, always smiling beside her parents as they presented oversized checks to grateful hospital administrators. The pictures showed exactly the kind of people who would find a retired Navy engineer from El Paso unsophisticated. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Helen. "You coming for Christmas dinner making tamales?" I stared at the message for a long time. Helen lived in a modest house in Tacoma, worked as a supervisor at Boeing, and had never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was. Her tamales were better than anything they'd serve at the Sterling family Christmas, and her grandkids actually enjoyed my loud laugh and construction site stories. But first, I had some investigating to do. The next morning, Carol left for her yoga class and lunch with friends. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then went to her home office. Carol wasn't particularly careful about computer security. Her laptop password was her maiden name and birthday. Her email revealed more than I'd expected. Months of correspondence with her parents about the Victor problem. Messages to friends about how embarrassing it was to be married to someone so blue-collar. Plans for redecorating the house once we can afford it. But it was the email thread with her divorce attorney that made my blood run cold. As we discussed, Victor has been very generous with marital assets. Given his contributions to house improvements and my parents' foundation, we should be able to claim significant support. The key is timing the filing to maximize retention of assets while minimizing his ability to hide income. I read the message 3 times. Carol hadn't just taken my money, she'd been planning to take everything and then disappear. I copied the relevant emails to a flash drive and closed the laptop. Carol thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that 22 years in the Navy teaches you a few things about strategic planning. I called my old Navy buddy Philip Santos, who'd become a family law attorney after leaving the service. Phil, I need some advice. Victor, good to hear from you. What's going on? I gave him the condensed version. The financial support, the Christmas exclusion, the discovery of the divorce plans. Phil was quiet for a moment. Jesus, Victor, how much money are we talking about? $155,000 over 4 years. And I've got documentation for all of it, gift or loans, never established either way. I just gave her what she said she needed. Do you have any evidence of how she really feels about you? Any documentation of the discrimination? Working on it. Good. In Washington state, emotional abuse and financial manipulation can affect asset division, but you'll need solid evidence. Phil, what if I told you I had an opportunity to expose all of this publicly in front of everyone who matters to her family? I'd say be very careful. But if you have documentation and you stay within legal bounds, sometimes public pressure can motivate people to settle fairly. That afternoon, I made a phone call to the Sterling Foundation. Sterling Foundation, this is Margaret speaking. Hi Margaret, this is Victor Martinez. I'd like to make a donation to your Christmas gala auction. Oh, how wonderful. What did you have in mind? I'd like to sponsor one of the major auction items, something that would require me to speak at the event. Well, our highest sponsorship level is $50,000, and yes, that includes remarks during the auction portion. Perfect. Who do I write the check to? Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared like I was planning a military operation. I organized every bank statement, every receipt, every piece of evidence. I made copies of Carol's emails and text messages. I researched the guest list for the gala and identified the key influencers who would be there. I also started paying closer attention to Carol's daily routine. She had lunch every Tuesday with her friend Barbara, a real estate agent who'd been divorced twice and seemed to enjoy giving advice about men. I made it a point to be near the restaurant where they met, close enough to overhear their conversations. He's just so predictable, Carol was saying as I sat at the bar, hidden behind a newspaper. Victor thinks he's so smart with his little construction business, but he has no idea how the real world works. Are you still planning to file in January? Barbara asked. Of course, my attorney says timing is everything. Right after the holidays when he's feeling generous and guilty about Christmas. We'll clean him out before he knows what hit him. They laughed like they were discussing the weather. I finished my drink and left, adding another piece to the puzzle of my wife's true character. The following week, Carol came home excited about something she'd seen at a boutique, a $3,000 dress that would be perfect for the gala. Victor, honey, I know it's expensive, but this is such an important event for my family. The photographer from Seattle magazine will be there, and you know how these things look in the society pages. I handed her my credit card without hesitation. Of course, you should look your best. She kissed me on the cheek, already planning how she'd explain her husband's sudden generosity to her friends. She had no idea she was buying the dress she'd wear to her own public humiliation. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons, wearing my best suit and watching Seattle's elite sip champagne and congratulate themselves on their generosity. Carol looked stunning in her $3,000 red dress. She'd been surprised when I'd told her I'd be attending after all as a major donor, but her social climbing instincts had overwritten her concern. Victor, darling, I had no idea you were planning this, Patricia Sterling said, air kissing my cheek with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a large check. I like to support good causes, I replied. Harvey Sterling clapped me on the shoulder. Quite generous of you, Victor. Quite generous indeed. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The same people who'd found me too unsophisticated for Christmas dinner were now fawning over me because of my donation. I wondered how they'd feel when they learned exactly where that money had come from. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from a vaulted ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds. Round tables covered in white linen surrounded a stage where a jazz quartet played softly. The guest list read like a who's who of Seattle society. Federal judges, bank presidents, tech executives, old families whose names were on hospital wings and university buildings. I recognized several faces from the newspaper's business section. There was Judge Morrison, who Carol's parents had mentioned, looking distinguished in his tuxedo. The Caldwells from Harvey's Bank sat at a table near the front, talking quietly with other couples I assumed were equally important in whatever circles mattered to the Sterling family. Carol moved through the crowd like a fish in water, air-kissing friends, posing for photographers, playing the role of successful businessman's wife with practiced ease. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, everyone in this room would know exactly what kind of person she really was. The auction began after dinner. I watched from my tables as various items were presented. Wine collections from private cellars, vacation packages to European villas, art pieces donated by local galleries. The bidding was enthusiastic but polite, the kind of restrained competition that demonstrated wealth without appearing vulgar. A week in Tuscany went for $15,000. A private wine tasting for 12 sold for $8,000. Each time the auctioneer's gavel fell, the crowd applauded politely, and the winners smiled with the satisfaction of people who could afford to be generous. I sat quietly, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching the theater unfold. Carol was at a table near the front with her parents, occasionally turning to wave at friends or pose for the photographer who circulated through the crowd like a society-paid shark. She looked radiant, completely in her element, playing the role of philanthropic socialite wife. Judge Morrison's table erupted in laughter at something Harvey Sterling had said. The Caldwells leaned in closer to catch every word. These were the people who mattered in Seattle, the ones whose approval Carol craved, whose acceptance had been deemed more important than her husband's dignity. I pulled out my phone and reviewed the speech I'd written, 25 lines that would change everything. I'd practiced it in my truck during lunch breaks, timing each pause, each revelation. In the Navy, we called it target acquisition and engagement. Tonight, I was about to engage multiple targets simultaneously. Margaret, the foundation's coordinator, approached the microphone. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, the kind of professional fundraiser who could make millionaires feel guilty for not giving more. Ladies and gentlemen, our final item tonight is particularly special. A $50,000 donation has been made to establish the Martinez family wing in the Children's Hospital, and Mr. Victor Martinez would like to say a few words. Applause filled the room as I stood up. I could see Carol beaming with pride at her table, probably already planning how she'd explain her husband's generosity to her friends tomorrow. Harvey and Patricia Sterling looked pleased as well, no doubt calculating how this would reflect on their family's social standing. I walked to the stage slowly, taking in the faces around me, 200 of Seattle's most prominent citizens. Judges, doctors, business leaders, old money families who traced their lineage back to the city's founding. People who mattered in this town, people whose opinion could make or break reputations. The microphone felt solid in my hand. The room grew quiet, expectant. They were used to donor speeches, the usual platitudes about privilege and giving back. What they were about to hear would be very different. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I'm honored to support such an important cause. Children deserve the best care possible, regardless of their family's background or circumstances. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. They expected the standard speech about childhood dreams and community responsibility. I've been thinking a lot lately about family, I continued, scanning the room slowly, about what we owe each other and about what happens when trust is broken. Carol was still smiling, but I could see a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This wasn't going according to script. 4 years ago, I fell in love with a woman who seemed to share my values. She spoke about family, about building something together, about the importance of supporting each other through good times and bad. The room was completely silent now. This was clearly not the usual donor speech, and people were starting to pay attention. Over the past 4 years, I've given my wife $185,000 to support her lifestyle and her family's various needs. I believed I was investing in our partnership, in our future together. I could see shock register on faces throughout the crowd. Several people turned to look at Carol, who had gone very pale. Harvey Sterling was starting to rise from his chair, but Patricia grabbed his arm. Last month, I discovered that this woman I loved, this family I'd supported, didn't consider me good enough to attend their Christmas dinner. I learned that I was too blue-collar, too unsophisticated for their social circle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a wine glass, the crystal shattering on the marble floor with a sound like breaking ice. I also discovered that my wife has been planning to divorce me for months, with help from her family specifically to maximize how much of my money she could take, while ensuring I couldn't touch assets I'd helped them acquire. The silence was absolute now. Every phone in the room was probably recording. Judge Morrison leaned forward in his chair, his legal mind processing the implications. The society photographer had stopped taking pictures, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck. So tonight, I want to dedicate this donation to something important. This $50,000 represents exactly 1/4 of the money I gave to people who saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM with inconvenient emotions. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. My hands were steady, my voice calm. 22 years in the Navy had taught me to function under pressure. I have documentation of every transfer, every gift, every payment. I have emails discussing how embarrassed they were to be associated with me. I have legal correspondence detailing their plan to take my assets and disappear. Carol's face had gone white as paper. Harvey Sterling looked like he was having a heart attack. Patricia sat frozen, her wine glass tilted at a dangerous angle. The Martinez family wing will help children who need medical care. But more importantly, it will stand as a reminder that family isn't about social standing or sophisticated dinner conversation. It's about respect, loyalty, and treating each other with basic human dignity. I set the folder on the podium with deliberate care. The sound echoed in the silent ballroom like a judge's gavel. Copies of all documentation will be provided to anyone interested in reviewing the facts. Thank you for your time, and I hope you'll think about what family really means as you go home to your loved ones tonight. I walked off the stage into absolute silence. Then, slowly scattered applause began. It grew louder as I made my way toward the exit, until nearly half the room was clapping. The other half sat in stunned silence, processing what they just witnessed. Judge Morrison was nodding slowly, his face grim. The Caldwells were whispering furiously to each other at tables throughout the ballroom. Conversations erupted as people tried to make sense of what had just happened. The careful social order of the evening had been shattered like expensive crystal. In the lobby, I handed copies of the documentation to 3 reporters I'd contacted earlier. The Seattle Times, the Business Journal, and a freelancer who specialized in society scandals. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. Prominent family's secret shame exposed at charity gala. Mr. Martinez, said the Times reporter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. Can you confirm the accuracy of these financial records? Every penny is documented. Bank statements, canceled checks, credit card receipts. All of it legal. All of it verifiable. The freelancer was already typing on his phone. This is going to be huge. The Sterling family has been Seattle royalty for 3 generations. They're about to learn what happens when royalty forgets how to treat their subjects, I said. Carol caught up with me in the parking garage, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks in black streaks. The $3,000 dress was wrinkled from her rushing through the crowd, and her hair had come undone from its perfect styling. Victor, please let me explain. I turned to look at her one last time. 4 years of marriage reduced to a conversation in a parking garage while Seattle's elite gossiped about our destroyed relationship upstairs. There's nothing to explain, Carol. You made your choice 4 years ago when you decided I wasn't good enough for your family. I just made mine. This will destroy us. My family's reputation, the foundation, everything we've worked for. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy me. She grabbed my arm, desperation replacing her usual composed demeanor. Victor, the money, I can pay it back. We can work this out. My parents have connections. They can make this go away. I looked down at her manicured hand on my jacket sleeve, the same hand that had signed emails planning my financial destruction. Carol, your parents' connections just watched you humiliate me in front of 200 people. Those same connections are going to read about tonight in tomorrow's newspaper. How exactly do you think they're going to help you now? The reality hit her like a physical blow. Her face crumpled as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. What am I going to do? You're going to figure it out the same way I figured out how to live without a wife who respected me. You're going to learn what it's like to earn people's trust instead of buying it. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the garage in her expensive dress, probably calculating how much this would cost her in the divorce settlement. In my rearview mirror, I could see her calling someone on her phone, probably her divorce attorney, probably getting very bad news about her prospects. The next morning, I had breakfast with Helen and her grandkids at their kitchen table in Tacoma. The tamales were perfect. The conversation was loud and full of laughter, and nobody once made me feel like I needed to apologize for who I was. Uncle Victor, Mom says you were on the news, said Tommy, Helen's 12-year-old grandson. She says you stood up to some mean people. Something like that, I said, ruffling his hair. Helen looked at me with the kind of pride you can't buy. I always knew you had it in you. Mom and Dad would be proud. My phone had been ringing all morning. Phil called first, laughing so hard I thought he might hurt himself. "Victor, you magnificent bastard. Carol's attorney called 20 minutes ago. They want to settle immediately. Full asset division, no alimony claims, and they're throwing in an additional $25,000 for emotional distress." 3 other attorneys had called offering to represent me in a class action suit against predatory financial manipulation of older men. Apparently, my story had struck a nerve with men across the city who'd found themselves in similar situations. The Seattle Times ran the story on the front page of the Metro section. Navy veteran exposes wife's financial scheme at charity gala. The article included quotes from several gala attendees who praised my courage in speaking out against elder financial abuse. A reporter from King 5 News wanted to interview me for a segment about protecting seniors from family financial exploitation. The state attorney general's office called to ask if I'd be willing to speak at a conference about elder abuse awareness. But the call that mattered most came from my neighbor's teenage son. "Mr. Martinez, I saw what you did on the news. That was amazing. My dad says you handled it like a real man. He wants to know if you'd come over for dinner Sunday. My mom's making enchiladas, real recognition from real people." That's what I'd been missing. 2 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers in Phil's office. Carol's signature was already there, along with her attorneys. The settlement gave me everything I'd asked for, plus compensation that brought my recovery to $200,000, more than I'd originally given her with interest for the inconvenience of being treated like hired help in my own marriage. The Martinez family wing opened 6 months later. I attended the dedication ceremony, and I've never again been told I don't fit someone's social circle. Turns out when you stop trying to fit in where you're not wanted, you start attracting people who appreciate exactly who you are. Carol moved back in with her parents after the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working as a real estate agent again, trying to rebuild the reputation she'd thrown away when she forgot that character matters more than social standing. The Sterling Foundation lost several major donors after the gala incident, and Harvey stepped down from the board 6 months later. As for me, I'm doing better than fine. I've got my sister's family, my Navy buddies, and the satisfaction of knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I've also got a new girlfriend, a Boeing engineer named Maria, who thinks my construction stories are fascinating and my laugh is exactly the right volume. Sometimes the best revenge is just showing people who you really are and letting them decide what that's worth. The Sterling family learned that lesson in front of 200 witnesses, and I learned something too. Respect isn't something you buy with monthly payments and expensive gifts. It's something you earn by respecting yourself enough to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. Never let family exploit your generosity. When love becomes conditional on your wallet, it's time to close the account and find people who value you for who you are, not what you can provide. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't fighting back with anger, but with strategic patience. Document everything. Plan carefully, and let their own actions destroy the reputation they care about more than your feelings.